What's going on, everyone? So, the other day I made a video diving into just the issues that the horror and Hollywood just keep making the same mistakes over and over again, right? Go check out that video if you haven't checked out that video. Because in this video, I want to kind of talk about, like, kind of what can they do to kind of get horror back on track? What can they do to kind of make horror a better version of itself, right? I'm not saying that there aren't good horror movies anymore. I'm not saying that we don't get the occasional, film that you're just like, oh wow, well, that was surprisingly good or that was pleasantly surprised. And I'm not saying that they can't pump out the remakes, right? I'm a huge Scream guy. I love that they keep pumping out these Scream movies. Go forever. But also the beauty of Scream, for example, is it's a franchise in which you don't have to constantly remake. You don't have to keep reinventing the wheel with, right? Every film, it's a different killer. It's not a Freddy, a Jason, a Michael, where it's like, okay, well, we killed him this movie, so we have to kind of reboot it, right? We have to remake it again, right? And again, there's nothing wrong with like the Jasons, the Freddys. Like, I would love a new Jason movie. I'd love a new Freddy movie. But also, those are films that are more on like the supernatural side and kind of on the goofy side. And, they're just beloved, iconic, historic horror franchises, right? Halloween has been remade in different timelines. I mean, you have to have an entire chart to track what's going on with the Halloween franchise, right? But you see, like, Hollywood just they keep making these remakes and they keep putting the cart before the horse, right? Strangers Chapter 1 is a great example. You talked about how you're not remaking the franchise, you're not doing this, you're not doing that, and then you did exactly what you said you would. Where if instead you said, and I understand, like if you say, oh yeah, we're remaking the first one to kind of reestablish roots in order to tell a further story for part 2 and 3, I understand that the concern is that people won't go see it, right? Because it's like, oh, we've already saw it. Well, then maybe if you're going to go a whole new direction, you're going to tell a whole new trilogy, maybe make that a whole new trilogy, right? And this is the problem, is that Hollywood just seems to want to continue to just give us more of the same and what we've already seen, remake and pump out franchises over and over again, but give us no new direction for those franchises, right? Like, again, The Strangers, great example. Cabin Fever remake, right? I gave some examples in that previous video of like, look, you keep falling for the same trap, and then on top of that, end up announcing a trilogy before you even know if the first part's going to be successful. And then now they keep not being successful. And now you see these scrambles and you see these disasters. And it's like, well, you did this to yourself, right? But like, again, there is a path to success. An example, right? Because again, I want to give examples. I don't want to just be negative. I love horror. Right? I built this channel on horror, right? And I want to see horror be successful. But so, like, an example would be the Paranormal Activity franchise, right? They, every year you got a new Paranormal Activity. They all kind of tied in together, but they're all kind of convoluted. But they were just fun films, right? You knew what they were, you knew what to expect. It was a unique idea. The first one was something that was groundbreaking, which again is another point, right? Like, you're never going to be able to capture what many of these past horror franchises originally were able to do, right? Like, The Exorcist came out at a time in which that never was a thing. So it shocked audiences. It was literally lightning in a bottle. Blair Witch Project was a new genre that, the found footage, and it was never done. Like, it wasn't this known commodity. Like, based on a true story, people believed it, right? Like, you look at these horror franchises over the years. Again, Scream is another great example, kind of reigniting the slasher genre, because it was something that, it kind of fell into this like pattern that just became stale. And it was like, oh, here's a new, fresh take on it. And that's kind of the point, right? Like, give us a new, fresh take. When Scream came out, you had a bunch of copycats. but they were all original. They were all unique. They all told a different story. They all did a different thing. Yes, there were some that were kind of carbon copy and whatnot, but for the most part, like you think of things like Urban Legends and I Know What You Did Last Summer, right? Like these were all, and Valentine's Day or Valentine's or whatever it's called, right? Like these films that came out that were from the same cloth as Scream, but they were excellent, right? And they were fun because they weren't the same thing. Right? So you look at something like the Paranormal Activity franchise. Paranormal Activity Next to Kin, I thought was great for like kind of more of the same, but here's a new take. Right? Like, again, however you feel about Next to Kin, whether you love the movie, hate the movie, indifferent about it, whatever. Right? I actually enjoyed it. I thought it was a good movie, but it's more about the point of here's a franchise that is basically been essentially the same thing over and over again and kind of all the same story that's kind of getting stale and it's not really having the success that it used to have. So here's a new version and a new take, right? But it's still within the same cloth and same mold of the previous installments, right? It still felt like a Paranormal Activity movie. Still felt like a film within the franchise, but it was just a different look. It was something new. It was like, oh man, this is refreshing, right? Even like, Saw X, right? Saw X took a completely different take and it was so well received. I mean, some people have that as their favorite movie in the franchise. But again, it was like Saw just continuously was the same thing over and over again. And it was just starting to get convoluted. It just became this like, okay, yes, it was fun. Yeah, it was cool to kind of go and see like what kind of crazy contraptions are there going to be, but it was kind of just becoming repetitive, right? And then they tried, Jigsaw, and they tried, from the Book of Saw, and all that. Like, and they just did all these things to try to, try to kind of take it in a different direction, I guess. But ultimately, it was like you can still keep it what it is. And then they just did that and kind of told a different story. Now they want to kind of expand on that more. Again, there are ways to remain creative, but still kind of take the safe bet. It's why they keep remaking and keep doing the same thing over and over again, because they're looked at as safer bets, right? But you did the Exorcist Believer is another great example of just terrible start. You put the cart before the horse. It was so bad that you ended up firing everybody. And you're supposed to have 2 more films coming out. And it's like, why did you have to handcuff yourself? Why did you have to tie it in? You couldn't have just told a new, fresh story, right? Like we get new Exorcist movies all the time. Every year you get a handful of them, right? And there have been good ones besides The Exorcist. I mean, Exorcism of Emily Rose is a name that comes to mind, right? Pops in my head immediately when I think of like, that was a great one, right? Like tell a good story, build good characters, have this family impacted. Like sometimes the correct answer is the simple answer. Simplicity sells, right? Sometimes you don't need to make this complex. Oh, we have to tie it into the original and we have to bring back all of the old characters. We have to do this and that. No, you don't. You don't. Right? Like, you can have a fresh move. Like, a lot of people feel in the camp of, like, there's no originality anymore in horror. And to an extent, they're right? Like, again, everything's kind of already been done. Right? You look at even, like, the original horror films that are coming out are just kind of different versions or, multiple things kind of stacked together. Right? Like, there's a new movie by M. Night it's like They or something like that that's coming out. I watched that trailer and I was like, this is just the movie from, or the TV series from. I was like, that's what this is, right? Like, so, but again, like, I don't know what the movie's going to entail. The trailer isn't necessarily the movie, so I don't know. Maybe it's not, but kind of felt like that, right? But I'm still intrigued and curious to see, like, how do they take a twist? There's nothing wrong with kind of having it be your own version of something else. It's not just your own version, right? Like, I don't mind if they do these. I think that there's some like The Exorcist? Did you really need to have this continued story? To me, it's just like, what is The Exorcist inherently? It's a possession film. It's, about demonic possession and a young child that gets possessed. Like, you couldn't have just told an entirely new, fun story, and if you wanted to, just slap The Exorcist on it, and just here's a new, almost anthology within the universe, right? Like, I think that would have been fine. I think that would have worked. I think people would have, again, it's about the execution, the story, and the movie. I mean, if the movie's just bad, the movie's just bad, and that's a big problem too. Is Hollywood's just making bad horror movies? Right? Like, character development has just completely gone out the window. Like, character development just like doesn't even exist anymore. Right? Like, it's just here's the story, here's the characters, here's 5 minutes of dialogue to kind of let you know who they are, rather than naturally and organically growing it and developing it over the course of a film. Nah, we're just gonna tell you that this is the jock, right? Like, just gonna tell you that this is that. It's just like, how do you fall in love and feel connected to these characters? Again, Scream, classic Scream. One, it's my favorite horror film, my favorite horror franchise. But two, Scream is probably as close to like a perfect horror movie as you can get, right? I mean, it's beloved. It like I said, it reignited a genre. It's still going and kicking to this day. But not just that, it told a story that you could follow and made sense, and it was a simple story, right? And it had characters that were so beloved, characters that, I mean, to this day, fans want to return, like Matthew Lillard as Stu. People still want him to return, right? And it's like, it's been 25 plus years and we haven't heard anything about the guy, but he's just such a beloved character because they did a great job. They didn't tell you, you know, that Randy is the movie nerd, right? Like, they showed you. They explained it through scenes and dialogue and interactions, right? Like, they did, like Tatum, the blonde with the big boobs, like, yes, she makes the joke and the reference, but you learned who her character was. Right? Stu being the goofball, you saw who they were. All of the scenes, like, very rarely did you see a scene in which a character was solo. They built and grew the characters together. Most of the scenes were with, Randy and Billy, or Randy and Stu, or Stu and Billy, or Stu and Tatum, or whatever, right? You got to learn and develop and build the characters through the story and interactions themselves, right? Like, and I feel like horror has just fallen so flat in that regard, right? Where they don't care like so much about the characters. They don't care so much about building the characters. But like, that's how you get us connected. That's how you get us to buy in. It's how you get us to believe in what and have the impact and gravitas that you want the film to portray and get across. You just have a bunch of random characters that none of us care about. Like, another great example would be Scream 5. Right? Since we're talking about Scream, we'll stick with the Scream thing, right? Scream 5. Character development was terrible in that film. So much so, people couldn't stand your main actress, right? Like, the consensus was, she's terrible, get rid of her. And they did a better job in Scream 6, and then everyone came around and were like, oh no, we love her. And now, what happened behind the scenes, but like, that's the point. Like, they failed to have us buy into the characters, and then people were like, okay, well, I don't like her, right? Like, and that's the problem. Like, you still have to have a story. You still have to have characters. You still have to have things that connect. And I just feel like that's primarily what has been lost in the horror genre and just Hollywood, period. Right? They're pumping out movies just to pump out movies rather than telling a convincing story. And then they throw their hands up and go, man, why, people don't go see original films, or people don't go watch these movies, or people don't do this or that and the other. And it's like, no, they do if it's good, right? Good films find their audience. I'm not saying it's never happened, but how like how many times has a general consensus good movie bombed? They usually do well because they find their audience. If it's a good movie, people will go. Scream, again, sticking with Scream. There was no such thing as social media. There wasn't all these things to really drive a film. That movie did better in its second month than it did ever, like the first month that it happened, because it was a great film that caught fire and word of mouth spread. It found its audience. It didn't need all this hype and you to basically spoil the film in the trailer. And you just, here you go. Put it out. If you build it, they will come. And it's still true to this day. Good content, good whatever. If it's good, people will find it. There is the occasional film that, is finds its audience later on down the road. But more times than not, a good film is just considered a good film. And that's what I think is missing the most. I just think we need to get back to making good films. But anyway, as always, this is a discussion. I pass a question on you. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. What do you think? How do you feel? Do you agree with my points? Do you disagree with my points? Or you're somewhere in between? However you feel, whatever your thoughts are, I'd love to hear it. Let me know down in the comments below. That being said, if you haven't liked this video, hit that like button. Helps me a lot, so you enjoy these types of videos, and I truly appreciate it. Not subscribe channel, what are you doing? Hit that subscribe button. Turn on the bell notifications. Appreciate y'all. See you in the next one.